Most of us think anger just happens. Someone cuts us off. Someone disrespects us. Someone says the wrong thing at the wrong time. And suddenly, we're angry, distracted, drained. We tell ourselves, that person made me angry. But that's not how it works. Anger isn't caused by other people. It's caused by the meaning we assign to what they do. Two people can experience the exact same situation. One explodes, the other stays calm. The difference isn't the situation, it's the lens. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If someone can control your emotions, they control you. And most of the time, we hand that control away without even realizing it. We think being unbothered means being numb. It doesn't. It means being clear. Clear about what actually matters. Clear about what deserves our energy. Clear about who gets access to our inner world. When you don't know why you're reacting, you react to everything. But when you do know your why, your values, your boundaries, your purpose, other people's behavior loses its power over you. Because not every comment is an attack. Not every disagreement is disrespect. And not every irritation deserves a response. The goal isn't to stop feeling anger. The goal is to stop letting anger lead. When you understand what truly drives you, you stop taking things personally that were never about you in the first place. You stop trying to win every moment. You stop proving, defending, explaining. And something remarkable happens. You don't get calmer because the world changes. You get calmer because you do. This is not about controlling others. This is about reclaiming control of yourself. And once you do that, very few people will ever be able to bother you again. Anger comes from meaning, not people, because events themselves are neutral until we interpret them. A comment is just sound. A message is just text. A look is just a look. What turns these ordinary moments into emotional explosions is the story we attach to them. We decide what something means, often in a split second, and then we react to that meaning as if it were an objective truth. When someone interrupts us, we don't get angry because of the interruption. We get angry because we label it as disrespect. When someone disagrees with us, the anger doesn't come from the disagreement, but from the meaning we assign to it, that we are being challenged, dismissed, or undermined. This process usually happens unconsciously. Our past experiences, insecurities, expectations, and beliefs rush in to fill the gap between what happened and how we feel. If you believe respect equals being listened to, interruption feels like an attack. If you believe your worth is tied to being right, disagreement feels like a threat. The other person didn't inject anger into you. They simply triggered a meaning you were already carrying. That's why the same behavior can produce completely different emotional responses in different people. One person shrugs it off. Another obsesses over it for days. The situation didn't change. The meaning did. Anger often feels automatic, but it's learned. It's a conditioned response built over time through repetition and reinforcement. We practice anger every time we replay the story in our head, every time we justify it, every time we say, anyone would be angry if this happened to them. Meaning is powerful because it shapes identity. When we interpret an action as disrespect, we're really saying something about ourselves, that we deserve better, that our status has been challenged, that our boundaries were crossed. Anger becomes a defense mechanism, a way to protect the version of ourselves we believe must be defended. The problem is that when meaning is unconscious, anger feels unavoidable. When meaning is conscious, anger becomes optional. This doesn't mean people never behave poorly or that actions don't have consequences. It means emotional ownership matters. If someone's behavior automatically dictates your emotional state, you're reacting, not choosing. The moment you question the meaning you've assigned, you create space. Space between stimulus and response. Space to ask whether the story you're telling is true, useful, or necessary. Many people assume letting go of anger means letting others win. In reality, it means refusing to let external behavior dictate your internal state. When you change the meaning, the emotion changes with it. Annoyance replaces rage. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Indifference replaces resentment. You begin to see that most people are acting from their own fears, habits, and limitations, not as a calculated attempt to upset you. Anger loses its grip when meaning is examined instead of assumed, when interpretation becomes a choice rather than a reflex. When you realize that no one can give your experiences meaning unless you allow them to. And that realization quietly shifts how every interaction is felt, processed, and carried forward into the next moment. Emotional control equals personal power, because the moment you can choose your response, you reclaim ownership of yourself. Without that control, your mood, focus, and energy are constantly outsourced to the people around you. A careless remark can ruin your day. A delayed reply can trigger anxiety. A stranger's behavior can hijack your peace. That isn't weakness of character, it's lack of control, and power cannot exist where control is missing. Power is often misunderstood as dominance over others, but real power begins internally. It is the ability to remain steady when circumstances are not. Anyone can stay calm when things go their way. The difference shows when they don't. Emotional control doesn't mean suppressing feelings or pretending you don't care. It means feeling everything without being ruled by it. The emotion still arrives, but it no longer drives the car. When emotions dictate behavior, decisions become reactive. Words are spoken that can't be taken back. Actions are taken that don't align with long-term goals. Regret follows, not because the emotion existed, but because it was allowed to lead. Emotional control creates a pause, and that pause is where power lives. In that space, you get to decide who you want to be in that moment, rather than defaulting to who you've been conditioned to be. People with emotional control are harder to manipulate. They don't rise to bait. They don't crumble under pressure. They don't need constant validation to stay centered. This makes them unpredictable in the best way. When others expect an outburst and receive calm, the dynamic shifts. When others expect compliance and meet clarity, respect follows. Control quietly rewrites power dynamics without confrontation. This kind of control is built, not inherited. It comes from awareness. Awareness of triggers, awareness of patterns, awareness of the internal dialogue that turns a situation into a threat. The more you recognize these moments as they arise, the less control they have over you. You stop confusing intensity with importance. You stop mistaking emotional urgency for truth. Emotional control also protects energy. Every emotional reaction costs something: attention, focus, time. When you react to everything, you have nothing left for what actually matters. Power is conserved energy directed with intention. When emotions are unmanaged, energy leaks everywhere. When they are managed, energy is invested deliberately. This doesn't make someone cold or detached. It makes them grounded. They can still care deeply, but without losing themselves in the process. They can engage without escalating, disagree without disrespect, walk away without bitterness. That stability becomes a quiet authority that others feel, even if they can't explain it. The irony is that the more control you have over your emotions, the freer you become. You're no longer trapped by impulses or ruled by momentary feelings. You're able to act in alignment with values instead of reactions, intentions instead of impulses, clarity instead of chaos. And that alignment becomes visible in how you speak, how you listen, how you move through conflict, how you hold silence, how you refuse to be rushed into decisions, how you stay composed when others lose control, how your presence alone changes the temperature of the room, how your calm becomes a boundary, how your restraint becomes strength, how your inner order creates outer influence. Clarity of values reduces reactivity, because when you know what you stand for, fewer things feel like a threat. Reactivity thrives in confusion. When values are undefined, every comment, criticism, or challenge feels personal because there is no internal reference point to measure it against. Without that anchor, people look outward for validation, direction, and approval, and anything that disrupts that search triggers an emotional response. Values act as a filter. They determine what matters and what doesn't, what deserves attention and what can be ignored. When someone says something provocative, a person without clear values reacts instinctively, driven by ego, insecurity, or the need to be seen as right. A person with clear values pauses. They ask, consciously or not, does this align with what I care about? If it doesn't, the emotional charge fades quickly. the situation loses its urgency. Reactivity is often a sign of misplaced importance. Not everything that feels loud is meaningful. Not everything that challenges you deserves engagement. When values are unclear, the mind treats every interaction as high stakes. Disrespect feels catastrophic. Disagreement feels like rejection. Criticism feels like an attack on identity. Clear values narrow the battlefield. They decide which hills are worth standing on and which ones are irrelevant. This clarity also removes the need to constantly defend yourself. When you know who you are and what guides you, you don't need to prove it in every conversation. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding or win every argument. Silence becomes easier because your worth isn't dependent on being acknowledged or agreed with. Reactivity often comes from the fear of being misjudged. Values replace that fear with confidence. People who lack value clarity tend to borrow standards from others. They react based on social expectations, group norms, or external pressure. This creates emotional instability because those standards constantly change. One moment you're acceptable, the next you're not. Values provide consistency. They stay the same even when opinions shift. That consistency creates emotional steadiness. Clarity of values also reframes conflict. Instead of asking how something makes you feel, you ask what it means in relation to what you believe. That shift moves you out of emotional reflex and into intentional response. You stop reacting to tone and start responding to substance. You stop escalating situations that don't align with your priorities. This doesn't mean values make life easier. They make it clearer. Clear values can still lead to difficult conversations and firm boundaries, but those actions come from choice, not impulse. The emotion may still be there, but it no longer dictates behavior. You act with direction instead of reaction. Over time, this clarity changes how others interact with you. People sense when someone is not easily shaken. They test boundaries less. They provoke less, not because you're intimidating, but because you're consistent. Reactivity feeds chaos. Consistency dissolves it. When values are clear, emotional reactions become information rather than commands. You notice them without obeying them. You recognize when something touches a value and when it simply touches ego. That awareness prevents unnecessary conflict and preserves energy for what truly matters, allowing you to engage deeply where it counts and disengage effortlessly where it doesn't, shaping a life guided by intention rather than impulse, grounded in principles instead of momentary emotion. Not everything deserves a response, because attention is a currency and every response is a payment. When you reply to every comment, every provocation, every misunderstanding, you are spending energy on things that may offer no return. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, but restraint requires far more strength than reaction. The instinct to respond comes from the belief that every stimulus demands validation, correction, or defense, and that belief quietly erodes self-control. Many reactions are driven by ego rather than necessity. Someone challenges your opinion, and the urge to reply isn't about truth, it's about identity. Someone criticizes you, and the impulse to respond isn't about growth, it's about self-protection. When everything feels personal, everything feels urgent. But urgency is rarely real. Most of the time, it's manufactured by emotion, not importance. Responding gives weight. When you engage, you elevate. Arguments gain power because they are fed. Provocations succeed because they achieve their goal, pulling you into emotional labor you never agreed to perform. Choosing not to respond doesn't mean you didn't notice. It means you noticed and decided it wasn't worth your time. That decision is a form of authority. Silence creates space. In that space, clarity emerges. You see whether something truly matters or whether it simply triggered you. Many situations resolve themselves when they aren't fueled. Misunderstandings fade. Opinions change, tension dissipates. Constant response interrupts this natural resolution and keeps issues alive longer than necessary. People often fear that not responding means losing control of the narrative. In reality, excessive responding often hands control away. When others can predict your reactions, they can steer you. When you become selective, your responses carry more weight. Fewer words, chosen deliberately, land harder than constant noise. Not every response needs to be verbal. Sometimes the most powerful response is a boundary. Sometimes it's a change in behavior. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's nothing at all. Action can speak without explanation. Silence can communicate standards without confrontation. This selectivity protects emotional bandwidth. Life already demands attention from work, relationships, responsibilities, and internal struggles. Reacting to everything adds unnecessary strain. When you reserve responses for what aligns with your values, your energy stays focused. You stop scattering yourself across every minor conflict. There is also wisdom in letting others reveal themselves without interruption. When you don't rush to defend or explain, patterns become visible. Intent becomes clearer. You gain information instead of losing composure. Reactivity closes perception. Restraint sharpens it. Choosing not to respond is not avoidance, it is discernment. It is the ability to recognize that your peace does not require participation in every exchange. Some conversations don't deserve continuation. Some opinions don't deserve rebuttal. Some behaviors don't deserve acknowledgement. The power lies in knowing the difference, in recognizing that your time and emotional energy are finite resources, and that every response should earn its place. Otherwise, silence remains the most honest and controlled choice you can make in that moment. Self-awareness turns triggers into choices because it exposes the space between what happens and how you respond. Triggers feel automatic only when they are unseen. The moment you recognize a pattern, it loses its authority. Awareness doesn't eliminate the emotional surge, but it interrupts the chain reaction that usually follows. Instead of being pulled forward by habit, you step back into observation. Most triggers are echoes from the past. A tone of voice, a dismissive gesture, a certain kind of criticism activates an old story. The body reacts before the mind can catch up. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, thoughts narrow. Without awareness, the reaction feels justified and immediate. With awareness, it becomes familiar. You've seen this before. That recognition alone weakens its grip. Self-awareness reframes the question. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is happening inside me?" That shift moves responsibility inward, not as blame, but as control. When you see your trigger clearly, you realize it isn't the situation itself that's dangerous. It's the meaning your mind is attaching to it. Once you see the meaning, you can question it. Triggers lose power when they are named. When you can say, "This is my fear of being ignored," or "This is my sensitivity to criticism," the reaction stops being personal and starts being informational. It tells you something about your values, your wounds, your expectations. Information invites choice. Unidentified emotion demands reaction. Self-awareness also slows time. In moments of high emotion, everything feels compressed. The urge to respond feels urgent and unavoidable. Awareness stretches that moment. It creates a pause long enough to decide whether the reaction aligns with who you want to be. That pause doesn't always feel comfortable, but it is where agency lives. People often believe their triggers define them. In reality, triggers reveal unexamined parts of the self. They point to areas that need attention, not obedience. When you act automatically, you reinforce the trigger. When you notice it without acting, you begin to loosen its hold. Each moment of awareness weakens the pattern and strengthens choice. This practice builds emotional maturity. You stop being surprised by yourself. You stop apologizing for reactions you didn't mean to have. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles and wondering why nothing changes. Self-awareness turns emotional repetition into learning. Triggers don't disappear overnight. They soften gradually as you respond differently. Each time you choose calm over escalation, curiosity over defensiveness, silence over impulse, you rewrite the internal script. The nervous system learns that the situation is survivable without reaction. Over time, the trigger still appears, but it no longer commands. It becomes a signal rather than a siren. You feel it, acknowledge it, and decide what to do next. That decision might still involve speaking up, setting a boundary, or walking away, but it comes from intention rather than reflex, from alignment rather than compulsion, from presence rather than habit. And in that moment, the power to choose replaces the need to react. When you put all of this together, a pattern becomes clear. Anger is not something others give you. It's something that forms inside you through meaning, habit, and unconscious reaction. Control doesn't come from changing people or avoiding discomfort. It comes from understanding yourself. The more aware you become of your emotions, your values, and your triggers, the less power external behavior has over you. Personal power grows when you stop reacting automatically and start responding intentionally. Clarity of values narrows your focus, so fewer things feel worth your emotional energy. Restraint teaches you that silence can be stronger than words, and that not every moment demands your participation. Self-awareness gives you the pause where choice lives, turning old triggers into opportunities to act in alignment with who you want to be. This isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending nothing affects you. It's about deciding what affects you and why. When you choose meaning instead of assumption, control instead of impulse, clarity instead of chaos, you stop being pulled by every external force. Calm becomes a skill. Composure becomes a habit. Peace becomes something you carry, not something you chase.